Hi everyone, welcome to another Caregiver workshop. I am Stephanie and I'll be hosting today's workshop on picky eating. Today I will briefly cover the following topics: developmental stages related to eating, positioning while eating, picky eaters versus problematic eaters, and then I'll share some strategies to help with picky eaters. As a disclaimer, please note I'm a student occupational therapist and I don't have specialized training in pediatric feeding. As such, the information presented in this workshop will be general in nature and will not focus on children who are experiencing a medical or developmental issues related to feeding. If you are worried your child is experiencing greater issues with swallowing, caloric deficits, or other medical concerns, please consult your pediatrician. So what is picky eating? Does mac and cheese, chicken nuggets, an affinity for beige-colored foods, and a hatred of vegetables sound all too familiar? If so, you're certainly not alone. Children are notoriously picky eaters, and picky eating is a concern for most parents, especially those for young children. In fact, research has shown that around age 2, children reach the highest incidence of picky eating, and this doesn't tend to slow until around age 6. But not to worry, as today I'm going to share a bunch of strategies you can try to help your picky eater be a little bit more adventurous at the table. I will emphasize that throughout this presentation, eating is complex. I believe it's far more than just consumption. Eating is a daily activity that sustains us. It gives us the energy to do the things we need and want to do. It's a social event, it's a cultural event, it's something we do with our friends and family. For some, it's an art, and for others, it could even be productivity. Regardless of what eating means to you, it's meaningful in some way or another to all of us. Now, when eating is interfering with everyday life, this is a significant issue. But if your child is functioning well and is getting a nutrient-balanced diet, you might just need some strategies to support them. For the bulk of this presentation, I will focus on just that. However, as a brief introduction, I wanted to share this fabulous developmental feeding chart produced by a team at Holland-Bloorview Kids Rehabilitation Hospital. Before we dive into the skills and strategies to increase your child's food repertoire, it's important to recognize where they are developmentally, as this will influence what they can eat safely. And just to note, the developmental stage in this chart is not matched to the chronological ages. So I'll draw you to the first 3 developmental stages. There's 6 in total. As you can see, especially with stages 1 and 2, the child's at a sucking stage, with stage 1 still having a tongue thrust, and by stage 2 the tongue thrust is gone and the tongue starts to move food from the front to the back of the mouth. In the first stage, they're only having liquids like breast milk and formula, but by the second stage they've moved into smoothed purees. In the third stage, munching chew begins, and this is when the jaw moves up and down when chewing. The tongue also begins to move to the side, bringing the food to the side teeth for chewing. At this point, they can start to have slightly thicker, smooth purees and very dissolvable, crunchy solids. In developmental stage 4, the munching chew gets better and rotary chewing begins, and this is when the jaw moves side to side to crush food while chewing. The tongue is easily moving, and the lips tend to be open during chewing. At this point, they can move to more finely chopped soft foods and use harder, crunchy, dissolvable solids. At stage 5, the rotary chewing is continuously improving, but there is some munching. The tongue movement is side to side and to the center, and the lips are getting better at staying closed, but a little food and liquid might still fall out. At this point, it's more bite-sized pieces of soft foods, but you're still wanting to avoid foods that have both a solid and a liquid component, such as a chicken noodle soup. And by stage 6, rotary chewing is well established. The lips are mostly closed when chewing and swallowing. There's good tongue coordination, and the jaw can open bigger or smaller when biting foods of different thicknesses. And this is when more regular foods are incorporated in the diet, and you can manage foods with 2 or more textures, like a chicken noodle soup. As you can see, as your child develops, their motor skills that they have can increase the type of food that they eat. And just to note, infants eat due to a reflex. As children grow, this reflex is suppressed, and then eating becomes a learned behavior that requires all these motor functions to do successfully. So remember, it takes time and learning. And to note, if your child's having difficulty eating at a certain developmental level, you can always go back to a previous level, i.e., if they're eating at level 5, but it's not really working, you can always eat the food from level 4. It's also so important to ensure proper posture when eating. As our airways and digestive tract share the same space, we want to ensure there's no issue with swallowing. Children are still developing, so they might not have the strength to sit up and have good posture just yet. Luckily, we have high chairs and booster seats and table trays to support their posture. As your child develops beyond these devices, it's important to ensure they still have that postural support during eating if they can't sustain it alone. So if you notice your child is slouching in the chair, you could add supportive pillows or blocks to help them sit upright. And make sure their feet are always touching the ground. And this can either be done by sitting in a child chair or adding a stool or block underneath. A helpful tip is to remember 90-90-90. And this is important for both you and your child, so it's a great habit to develop young. When eating or doing any kind of table work, sit at 90 degrees at the hips, knees, and ankles. And while I'm on this point, make sure you are sitting when eating, not walking around. This is very important to limit swallowing mishaps. Finally, I just wanted to share a list of red flags, also provided by Holland Bloorview Kids. If your child exhibits these behaviors while eating, it might indicate they are having some difficulty with safe swallowing. Before considering skill development, this is something you should consult your healthcare team with. So that would be gagging or vomiting, choking, spitting out food, etc. Next, I wanted to discuss picky eating and problem feeding. For most of you, although your child is picky, they are likely still getting the right amounts of nutrients and a diet that includes food from all 4 groups. But for others, it may be more than picky eating, so I wanted to quickly share this resource for you. I adapted this chart from SOS, which is a program for problem feeders. Personally, I don't have SOS training, so I'll only speak to this chart in general. But SOS is a feeding program to support those with feeding challenges. So what does a picky eater look like? They have a decreased range or variety of foods, but still equal to or greater than 30 foods. And food lost to burnout from food jagging are usually eaten again after 2 weeks. So jagging is when your child repeatedly eats the same food and then kind of tires of it. But with picky eaters, after that 2-week break, you can tend to incorporate that in the diet again. They also eat at least one food from all the food groups or the texture groups. They can tolerate new foods on their plate, such as touching or tasting, even if they're reluctant. And they frequently eat different sets of food at a meal with other family members, but typically eat the same time and table as family members. And I just see I have a slight spelling mistake there. Sorry about that. And sometimes they can be reported as a picky eater in different appointments. Conversely, a problem feeder has a limited range of food, less than 20 foods. And when food jagging occurs, even after a break, they don't bring back that food to their diet. They refuse entire categories of food groups or textures. And it's described as cries, screams, tantrums, totally falling apart when new foods are presented. They almost always eat a different set of food than their family, and this might be at a different time or different place. And their picky eating habits are reported to be persistent. If you feel your child is better represented as a problem feeder, I would highly recommend you speak to your pediatrician. Please do not panic. Although it's not normal, it could be related to a developmental issue or medical problem or behaviors, so this is a discussion you should have and get to the bottom of. With that, if any of the information prior is something that alarms you or concerns you, or even something you just want to be more sure about, again, I would advise you should speak to your healthcare team. To reiterate, as an occupational therapy student, I do not have the specialized training in feeding, but there are occupational therapists and other clinicians such as speech-language pathologists and dietitians who work with families experiencing these significant issues. If you feel your child needs more help with feeding or skills, please consult your pediatrician and perhaps request an OT referral. Now, if there aren't any medical or safety concerns and your child is a typical picky eater, we can move on to strategies to help with expanding their food range. When working with families, we consider 3 areas we can work towards. That is the person, the occupation, and the environment. And this is very OT. As I mentioned in the beginning, children around age 2 are the pickiest eaters. It's actually theorized that this is an evolutionary strategy, as kids at this age are unsure what's edible and inedible, so it's almost thought to be a protective factor. For example, think about how many kids put crayons or markers in their mouth without mom and dad telling them what to do, telling them not to, so they become more cautious. They're also at the age where they're becoming more independent. They're beginning self-feeding, they're testing boundaries, and they're looking for control. So they might want to choose what they're eating and aren't afraid to question you about what you're feeding them. As well, from about age 3, they begin to recognize parental deception. Things like, "Here comes the airplane," may no longer work. In terms of occupation, we look at eating. During infancy, children, as I mentioned before, children just eat via reflex and are fed. But as they develop, it becomes more. They begin to learn that eating involves grocery shopping and cooking, setting up tables, cleaning, meal times, people gathering, special occasions, etc. And finally, the environment, which in this case I just put as the table. Children are very social beings. They observe what you're doing and how you act and approach meal times. They learn customs and rituals. They see how other children act when eating at playdates and programs, and they learn about etiquette and rules. So, I will try to give you some tips that support expanding the food range by targeting each of these levels. Keeping those various factors in mind, I want you to now do a little exercise where you imagine your friends have just invited you over. When you enter their home, they invite you to the table where they present you an array of foods. Unfortunately, it's all foods you dislike. What do? You probably sit there thinking, "Oh gosh, I don't want to eat this." Or maybe you're thinking, "How do I get out of eating this?" Do you say you're full or just eaten? Do you try it because you feel bad? Or do you be honest and say, "No, thank you, I don't like that"? Regardless, the whole experience is anxiety-provoking and uncomfortable. Now, this is how your kids feel when they get new foods or are offered foods they don't like. They try so hard to please mom and dad, but sometimes it can be scary. So remember to always make the experience a positive one. If you recall from the activity schedule workshop, I'm a big supporter of routine. Now, without being too rigid, it's helpful to have scheduled meals and snack time. In my example, I used 3 meals with 3 snacks. And just to note, the times I chosen are just times I picked, but you would have to pick times that work for you and your child. As children develop, they learn when they're hungry and when they're full. So you can offer foods at these times, but let them choose how much they eat or approach you if they're hungry again. If you have questions about how much your child should be eating, or if you find your child is never identifying times of hunger, this is a conversation you might want to have with your pediatrician as well. Now, having regular meal times helps create meaningful family time. It helps with sustaining energy and promoting digestive health. And it provides your child with some control, as they know what's going on. However, I do want to emphasize that these meal times, again, are not rigid. If your child is hungry, of course give them some food. Otherwise, they're going to be upset and cranky. And even more importantly, when trying to expand their food range, do not try to expose them to new foods during this hungry, cranky time, as the experience will not be positively reinforced. Instead, aim to try new foods when your child is relaxed, happy, and not overly hungry. For the following approach, I just want to first mention that the key is mealtime needs to be a stress-free, positive event. So if you are finding meal times to be very high stress, the following idea may not be the best for you. If mealtime is overwhelming and high stress, again, I would recommend finding some stress reduction ways before adding the additional stressor of food exposure, because it's not always easier. A helpful activity is creating a food catalog of what your child eats. You can include any food items. This could be fish sticks, popsicles, or bananas. You can track if your child enjoyed eating the food, or what they didn't enjoy about it. And this tool might provide you with some insight on what your child actually eats. As well, it'll give you a starting point for expanding into new foods. The whole hope is to bring down the stress of the parent. So you might notice from this your child's actually eating more foods than you thought. But again, if you're finding this to cause more stress, I would not recommend following through this activity, as a low stress, positive environment is the best you can do for a positive mealtime. Next, I'm going to introduce a concept called food chaining. Food chaining is actually used in a therapy for picky eaters and problem feeders. However, I'm just going to be borrowing some of the concepts, and this is not a full explanation of food chaining. If this is something you're interested in, again, this would be something you could get a referral for an occupational therapist for. So the goal of food chaining is to expand the range of food a child eats by introducing new foods by building off of foods they already like and have a positive experience with. You present your child with new foods that are similar in taste, temperature, texture, color, and use this to create links to new foods. Before diving into food chaining, I wanted to bring up a common mistake. Parents often try to hide foods that their child doesn't like and foods they do like. Unfortunately for picky eaters, this could lead to distress as they are deceived. So I want to make clear, when trying to expose your child to new foods, we want to keep the situation positive and low stress. You can, however, combine like foods if you're open with your child and don't make it a surprise. Let your child know that trying new foods takes practice, but their mouth will learn to love new foods. For example, if your child loves vanilla yogurt, you can tell them, "Hi dear, since you love vanilla yogurt, it could be easy to learn to like strawberry yogurt. I have an idea. Let's try adding a little scoop of my strawberry yogurt to your vanilla yogurt. It might not taste great at first, but you can learn to like it. Again, this limits the surprise factor, lets the child know they're safe, and gives them a bit of control. Food masking is another idea. If your child loves ketchup on fries, you could suggest adding ketchup to a sweet potato fry. And take small steps. Maybe they don't eat the sweet potato the first time, but if they lick the ketchup off, it's a start. And I guess to reiterate that point, it's a safe space. Don't try with too many foods at a time and don't add pressure. And you can work with small success points. So maybe it's just looking at the food. Maybe it's just touching the food. Maybe it's just a nibble. We slowly build up to eating the food. Patience, persistence, positivity, playful, and no pressure. I borrowed this mnemonic from a segment with Dr. Smiley. It's in Healthy Living Chicago, which is posted in the reference. He used 3 keywords: patience, persistence, and positivity. I added in playful and no pressure. I want to use these 5 words to guide us with some easy tips to help with food exposure. The first being patience. A child may refuse to eat a food, but that doesn't mean they can be exposed to it. And there's many ways to expose them to it. Ask them if they want to help you shop for a food. Ask them to help you clean or prepare it. For example, if they don't want to eat lettuce, have them rip up the lettuce leaves or stack an ingredients in a sandwich. Give them some control. Ask them how you should prepare the food. Hi dear, would you like chopped, raw, or boiled broccoli? Or give them options of 2 foods in the same groups. Hi hun, tonight would you like peas or carrots at dinner? This gives them control, but within your boundary. The next is being persistent. Did you know it takes children approximately 15 to 25 positive exposures to a particular food to add it to their food repertoire? If they refuse a particular food, continue to offer it and talk about it. Adding a small portion to their plate, or even having a communal plate on the table, or offering it off your plate are all strategies you can use to be persistent. To note, persistent, but if they say no, that's okay. Just offer. Positive. Make eating and trying new foods a good experience for the whole family. Children learn from your behavior. Demonstrate a fun and engaging mealtime. Put away distractors like electronics and newspapers and talk with your family. As well, don't just tell them to eat a food because it's good or healthy. Use sensory descriptors to talk about the taste, the texture, the color, the sound it makes when you bite, even the smell. Play. This goes hand in hand with positivity. Forget the saying, don't play with your food. Play creates fun, positive opportunities for engagement. Play with all the steps of eating. You can play with pretend food, such as playing house or creating food with Play-Doh. You can have tea parties, theme nights like a Hawaiian cookout. You can have a picnic or a meal in the fancy dining room. Encourage creativity. Ask your child, what does the food look like? Maybe mashed potatoes look like fluffy sheep or clouds. Or you can have silly food nights like build your own pizza. Fun things like ants on a log, which is celery, peanut butter, and raisins. You can use cookie cutters to change the look of your sandwiches. But I would advise, if using cookie cutters, involve your kid in this part too. You can also use colored utensils and placemats and You can share all sorts of different utensils like pots and pans and have your kids just bang on them or put them away or take them out for you. Have them help. You can make a game when grocery shopping or even plan the list together. You can give them control by asking them to suggest a side dish for a meal each week. There are also tons of children's books on eating and songs you can sing. One of my favorite books is actually in the latest online circle time, and that's The Hungry Caterpillar. Play is so important, and the list is endless. All you need to do is create positive experiences that will reinforce the food is safe to eat. Finally, no pressure. Again, relating back to positivity. Forcing your child to eat something, punishing if they don't, or even just keeping them at the table isn't going to help. Your child needs to trust you and know that mealtime is a safe time. This does not mean they can just refuse to not eat a certain food. They do have to try, but trying's enough. As I mentioned before, this might be touching the food or smelling the food or taking a little nibble. They just need to try. I also wanted to note that a common plan with parents is to reward eating their dinner with a dessert treat. Now, dessert is fun and I'm all for it. But as I mentioned, children love to test boundaries and they want that control. If you tell your child, if you eat this, you get desserts, it becomes more of a mission to get dessert. And they are great negotiators. Instead of finishing their carrots, they might just say, 1 bite. So, try your best to make the reward the meal itself, using positive language and encouragement and making the whole meal time a stress-free and calm time. Remember, if they're acting out, the behavior means something. So, try to figure out what it is, and a great way to start is by having mealtime, not adding to that behavior. I want to summarize again by saying eating is complex. And in this little workshop, I cannot nearly cover all the aspects. But if I could give you a major tip, it would be engage your child. Engage your child in the entire experience of eating and make it a positive one. Again, if you feel a medical or developmental issue is resulting in picky eating, please contact your healthcare team and look into that. But for the most part, it's just a part of childhood development. Kids keep you on your toes. As a parent, it's your job to provide food and encourage healthy eating. But ultimately, as your child develops, it's their responsibility to eat. So don't be so hard on yourself. Picky eating is a notorious issue, and there's nothing wrong with eating some beige-colored foods some of the time. Thank you so much for joining me for another Caregiver workshop. And thank yourselves for investing this time to learn more about your child's well-being. You are all amazing parents. I've attached below the references of what I've used today. At the top, I added some easy reading ones, but if you wanted more information on the various food programs, they're also included. Thank you so much, and I look forward to having another Caregiver workshop with you in the future. Bye for now. So these are the references. I will post them in the comment section or the description section, of the video. And the ones at the beginning are probably the most easy reads. That's what I'd recommend. But again, feel free to check out the other ones as well. Thank you so much. Bye.